Recently, a lot of companies were forcing return to office mandate. And this makes us wonder, is the golden age of remote work finally over? There are mainly two schools of thoughts here. One argues that the remote work was just an anomaly introduced because of COVID, and now we are transitioning back to the old normal of no remote world. Whereas the other side argues that the in-office work was a factory-era mindset, when everyone has to be present in the factory to produce the stuff. And now as companies and workers have realized that they can actually get the work done from anywhere, the future belongs to the remote work. I've been extensively researching the US tech job market for over 4 months now. And for that, I've analyzed the job trends in different job portals. I've gone through hundreds of pages of different tech job reports published by CompTIA, Indeed.com, and I've analyzed the statistics coming from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and numbers published by Federal Reserve Bank. So in this video, I'm going to share my thoughts based on all this analysis as well as my 15 years of experience working in the tech industry. But before we go look at that, let's see what the remote work trend has been looking so far. So before pandemic, in the year about 2019, only about 5% of tech positions were remote. So there was some component of remote work present, but it was just very tiny. And as COVID happened and the government actually forced the companies to shut down their offices, pretty much 100% of tech workers working from home. But as the government relaxed the office closure requirements, we saw that some companies started bringing workers back to the office. And we have seen this gradual decline from 100% to about 20% of workers working remotely. So now the question is that in the future, would we go down from the 20% to same back 5% level of remote work? Or this 20% is sort of the new normal and this is where the remote percentage stays? Or the third scenario is that the remote work trend actually again go back up. Now to understand which of these three scenarios is more likely, we have to understand why the executives are making the decision of remote work or in-office work. What are the factors which are influencing it? And based off all that, we can make some prediction on what the future looks like for the remote work. Now we all know that the decision of in-office or remote work is mainly made by the company executives. But these executives do not make these decisions in isolation. There are mainly two kinds of people they are trying to make happy. One is the investor. For the public tech companies, it could be individuals who are buying the stocks of that company. For smaller companies, it could be venture capital, it could be angel investors, or it could be any other person who has invested money in that company in whatever shape or form. And these investors, they invest money in the company and what they expect back is the profits from that money. And now on the other side, there are actually tech workers in our case. And what they get from the executives is usually salary and other perks. And what execs want in return is the output from these tech workers. Now, historically, the interest rates have been hovering around 2% for the last 2 to 3 decades. And with 2% interest rate from Fed, the expected return for most companies was about 10%. But for the last 2 years, we have seen that the interest rates are now hovering at about 5%. So the investors are not happy with the usual 10% return. They want more return on their investment. So they are putting a lot of pressure on the executives to increase their profitability. And what execs are trying to do is they are first trying to cut on how much money they have to pay to the workers. They are doing it in the shape of layoffs. And the other thing they are trying to do, they are trying to increase the output per worker. And this has been the main contributing factor towards this return to office mandates. Now, the problem with the output is that it is very hard to measure, especially for knowledge workers. Companies' profitability is dependent on so many factors, and it is very hard to isolate the impact of a single software engineer on the company's profitability. And you cannot just measure, for example, the lines of code that person has written to see that what is the output from that engineer. So in that case, companies have to rely on other pseudo measures to measure the output of engineers. Now, one thing which is causing some bias is that most of these senior executives, they have been working in the in-office environment for decades. And there is this old mindset that you can only be effective and working properly if you are sitting in an office environment. Now, this is an argument which a lot of new generation people just don't buy. And to top it off, there are some studies which are loosely indicating that if you are working from in office, the productivity of engineers is for some reason higher. Though there are studies to counter that argument, but considering the initial bias I've talked about, executives are more inclined currently to give weightage to the studies which back up in-office environment benefits. And this has led to that decrease in remote work percentage over the last 1.5 years. Now, there are some consequences which are happening because of that gradual decrease from that remote work percentage. One is that wherever they are enforcing this strict mandate of return to office, they are seeing that there are a lot of people who are leaving those companies. And most of the people who leave are senior engineers. Now, in the tech, there is this concept of 10x engineer, that a senior, knowledgeable engineer is 10 times better than a junior average engineer. And these 10x engineers are very much in demand always, even in the current tough tech job market. And since they have the most options to leave the companies they are working in, as soon as the companies start enforcing these return to office mandates, these are the people who leave in the first place. Now, currently, companies are sort of shrugging off that churn and are not caring much about it, because they are trying to reduce the costs, and most of these senior engineers cost a lot of money. And also because of these mass layoffs from big tech companies, there is a good availability of even senior engineers in the market. So companies for now can sort of ignore that churn, but they cannot ignore it for long enough period of time. Another factor to consider is that most of these senior people have families and they want to move away from the bigger metropolitan areas where they can afford and live in a bigger home to raise their families. So the need and demand for remote work is much higher in the senior engineers than it is for junior engineers. The other thing is that though there are some studies which indicate that in-office environment actually lead to better output, as I said before, there are many more studies, especially the recent ones, which have the other argument that workers are more satisfied when they are working from home and their output is actually higher. So though the benefits of in-person office work are not very clear, the cost of bringing people in office are actually very visible and very high. For example, for a company who is hiring for remote will get many more applicants, will get many more senior 10x engineers, and they can hire from pretty much anywhere. They are not geographically restricted to the area they are operating from. So that is one benefit. The other benefit is that, especially when you talk about big metropolitan areas, the cost of operating an office there is actually pretty high. I remember in 2015, I was working for a very big bank in San Francisco, and my manager told me that at that time, my team has to pay about $3,500 per seat to the building department of the same bank. This is called cross charge, where one department of the company pays to another department of the same company. So to afford a space for a single engineer to work in that office was costing that building department $3,500 per month. Because this includes the mortgage or the rent of the building, the utility cost, the security cost, the cleaning cost, the cost of the coffees and snacks and desks, etc. And the same company, if they were to go remote, would clearly be able to save that $3,500 per month. So in a nutshell, I think that going through that remote work experience was actually a one-way door. Once we have crossed that door, we cannot go back to the old normal where everyone used to work from office. Companies are currently desperate for output and efficiency, and that is why they're trying to see that if bringing people in office actually helps. And as more and more studies are coming out, which are actually telling that this is not the case, I think in future, a lot of companies which are forcing the return to office mandate will start reconsidering the remote options. Another factor is that the tech job market is pretty tight right now. So even with the harsh return to office mandates, a lot of people who are currently not leaving, as soon as the tech job market becomes a little more friendly, they will start leaving those companies in favor of companies which are more remote friendly. And the companies which have these harsh return to office mandates will have a very hard time in future hiring for people, because most of the senior good engineers would definitely prefer more remote friendly companies. So my prediction for the future is that of the three scenarios which I discussed before, the third scenario is the most likely one. I think that if we are currently at 20% remote work, it is going to increase in future. And as in the future, the only companies which will thrive would be the ones which are more remote friendly. I hope you like this video. Thank you so much for watching.